She was the paralyzed daughter of a billionaire CEO, sitting all alone on her 25th birthday, with nothing but a cake and silence. But then, a black single father and his little boy knocked on the door, and what happened next shocked everyone. The city lights flickered against the glass towers, but inside the Whitmore residence, a penthouse high above the noise of the streets, silence clung to the air like an uninvited guest. The silence was not of peace, but of absence. In the center of a lavish dining room sat a young woman in her wheelchair, a cake glowing softly before her with 25 small flames. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, daughter of Robert Whitmore, a man whose face was often on magazine covers, hailed as one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. Yet for all the headlines about his empire, the truth hidden behind those polished images was that power could not mend the deepest wounds of the heart. Eleanor's hands trembled faintly on the armrest of her chair. Once a vibrant dancer whose grace seemed untouchable, her life had changed forever after an accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. At 25, her youth had been rerouted into a life of therapy sessions, whispered conversations behind closed doors, and the unshakable loneliness of watching the world move faster than she could. And tonight, on what should have been her birthday celebration, the vast dining table remained empty. The staff had been dismissed early. Her father, buried in corporate meetings, had called to say, "I'll make it up to you." She had heard those words so often, they echoed like background noise. She looked at the cake, its frosting carefully decorated by the housemaid who had tried to bring some warmth to the day. "Make a wish, Miss Eleanor," the maid had said gently before retreating, leaving her with the flames. A wish? For what? For healing? For companionship? For something as simple as a hand reaching out? Not in pity, but in presence? Eleanor's eyes glistened as she let the moment sink in. 25 candles. 25 years. Yet here she was, blowing them out alone. On the other side of the city, just a few blocks from the glowing towers of wealth, a smaller world thrived. One marked not by marble floors or glass ceilings, but by resilience, laughter, and unspoken struggles. Malik Johnson, a 45-year-old single father, worked long shifts as a mechanic. His hands were always marked with grease, his back stiff from years of lifting. But his spirit carried the strength of someone who had faced more storms than most men could survive. Widowed when his son was just a toddler, Malik had raised little Jordan on his own, teaching him dignity, faith, and the power of kindness in a world that often dismissed them because of their skin. That evening, Malik was walking home with Jordan when the boy tugged his hand, his eyes catching something through the large glass windows of a penthouse lounge above. Children's eyes see what adults overlook, and Jordan, at only 12 years old, noticed the young woman sitting alone with her cake. "Dad," he whispered. "Why is she all by herself?" "It's her birthday." Malik paused, following his son's gaze. It was just a fleeting glance, one that most would ignore, but Malik had lived long enough to recognize the silent cry of loneliness. And Jordan's innocent words carried the kind of truth adults often bury. No one deserves to be alone on their birthday. Inside, Eleanor was just about to blow out her candles when she heard a soft knock at the door. She frowned, surprised, for she wasn't expecting anyone. The maid had left, her father was still out, and the world outside never came knocking. The knock came again, this time accompanied by a hesitant but gentle voice. "Excuse me, I hope we're not intruding. My son noticed. It's your birthday. Would you mind if we joined you for a moment?" The words felt almost unreal. Eleanor's breath caught. She turned toward the door, and for the first time that night, her heart stirred. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked. Not for business, not for charity, not for pity, but simply to share a moment with her. She hesitated, her pride telling her to decline, her loneliness begging her to accept. And then softly she answered, "Yes, please come in." When Malik and Jordan stepped inside, The contrast between worlds could not have been sharper. Malik's worn jacket and Jordan's school backpack seemed out of place among the gleaming chandeliers and polished marble floors. Yet, as they entered, it was not awkwardness that filled the room. It was warmth. Jordan's eyes lit up when he saw the cake. "Wow," he said innocently. "That's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen." His smile was wide, genuine, and free of the judgment Eleanor had grown so used to. Malik placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder and looked at Eleanor with respectful sincerity. "Happy birthday, miss. I know we're strangers, but no one should be alone to blow out their candles." For a moment, Eleanor couldn't speak. She blinked back the sting in her eyes, overwhelmed not by their presence, but by the simple humanity they carried with them. She gestured toward the table, her voice soft but steadier than she felt. "Please sit. I'd like that." And so, the three of them gathered around the table. The room, once heavy with silence, now hummed with a quiet but undeniable life. Jordan leaned forward eagerly. "Can I help you cut the cake?" he asked. Eleanor laughed lightly, the sound surprising even herself. "Of course," she said. Her hand moved clumsily against the knife, but Malik's hand reached gently to steady it. Not in a way that highlighted her weakness, but in a way that shared the strength of human connection. Together, they cut the first slice. For Eleanor, it wasn't just a piece of cake. It was the first taste of belonging she had felt in years. The first slice of cake was passed with laughter, and though the room was still vast and filled with quiet corners, the presence of Malik and Jordan shifted its atmosphere entirely. Where emptiness had lingered, now there was warmth, a fragile warmth but real. Eleanor watched Jordan chatter excitedly about school, about how his teacher said he had a gift for drawing, about how his father worked long hours, but still found time to attend every one of his art shows. Malik chuckled softly at his son's stories, pride evident in his eyes. Eleanor listened, the corners of her lips lifting into a smile she hadn't felt in a long time. For years, her birthdays had been formal events, orchestrated with guests who cared more about her father's wealth than about her life. Those parties had been loud, crowded, filled with chatter that never touched the soul. Yet tonight, with only two strangers, something far more valuable lingered: sincerity. Eleanor realized painfully that she had never known how much she craved it. As Jordan reached for another bite of cake, he looked at Eleanor and asked innocently, "Don't you get lonely in such a big house?" The question, blunt in its honesty, made Eleanor's chest tighten. Her gaze dropped, and for a moment she considered lying. It would have been easy to dismiss the question, to offer a polite answer, the way she was trained to do at every interview and charity gala. But Jordan's wide, searching eyes didn't ask for politeness. They asked for truth. "Yes," she whispered, "I do. More than I can explain." The words hung in the air. Malik shifted slightly, his eyes softening as he regarded her. He knew that tone too well. The sound of someone carrying more than they should. The sound of someone whose loneliness had become a shadow they could not outrun. His life as a black man in America had given him an intimacy with isolation, with being seen but not truly known, with existing in rooms that weren't built for him. And though their circumstances were different, Malik understood something in her voice that transcended privilege or poverty. "You know," Malik said quietly, his voice steady, "loneliness doesn't care how much money you have. It doesn't care if you live in a house made of glass, or in a small apartment down the block. It finds you all the same. The only way we fight it is by letting people in." Eleanor looked up at him then, meeting his gaze. She saw not pity, not condescension, but recognition. It startled her, how deeply his words struck. Here was a man who worked with his hands, who bore the weight of bills and responsibility every day, yet who carried himself with a dignity that her father's wealth could never buy. Jordan, oblivious to the depth of the moment, grinned and added, That's why me and Dad are always together. We're a team. He tells me all the time that people are stronger when they don't try to do everything alone. Eleanor's throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. It was from the quiet ache of something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She nodded slowly. Your father is right, she said softly. They sat together longer than Eleanor expected, sharing small slices of conversation like pieces of cake. Malik spoke little about himself, but when he did, his honesty was disarming. He told her about losing his wife to illness when Jordan was only 2, about the nights when he came home from the garage so tired he could barely lift his arms, yet still found the strength to tuck his son in with a story. He spoke without embellishment, without asking for sympathy. It was simply his truth, worn into his voice like calluses into his hands. Eleanor, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years. She spoke about the accident, the car that had taken away her ability to dance, the endless stream of doctors, the moments when she wondered if her life had ended at 20. She didn't usually share these things. To most people, she offered a polite smile, a graceful silence. But Malik and Jordan didn't demand perfection from her. They gave her space to be broken, and that freedom felt like a gift. As the evening deepened, Malik glanced at his watch, realizing it was late. We should let you rest, he said gently, standing with Jordan. But thank you for letting us share your day. Eleanor felt an unexpected rush of panic. The thought of the room returning to silence, of the candles burning down to nothing with no voices around her, was unbearable. She surprised herself when she spoke quickly. Wait, please stay a little longer. Malik studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you want. Jordan beamed, hopping back into his chair. I can tell another story, he said eagerly. And so he did. He told a story about his art teacher, about the day he drew a picture of his mother from an old photograph, and how his father framed it on the wall. His little voice filled the vast dining room with something it had not heard in years. Innocence, laughter, life. Eleanor watched them, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. She had thought her life was destined to be defined by emptiness, by the absence of what she lost. But tonight, a mechanic and his son had reminded her that life still had room for unexpected joys. As the candles finally burned low, Malik helped her extinguish the last flickering flame. He looked at her with quiet sincerity and said, Happy birthday, Eleanor. I hope this year brings you what you need most. She held his gaze, her voice trembling as she replied, It already has. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the Whitmore penthouse, bouncing off glass and polished silver. Eleanor awoke with the faintest smile tugging at her lips, something that hadn't happened in years. For the first time since the accident, her birthday had not ended in loneliness. The echo of Jordan's laughter still lingered in her ears, the memory of Malik's quiet words still warming her chest. It had been simple, unplanned, and utterly human. And it was precisely that simplicity that made it priceless. But the fragile joy of the evening would not remain untouched. Robert Whitmore returned late that morning, his presence filling the apartment with the energy of a man used to commanding rooms. His assistant trailed behind him, updating him on market reports and scheduled meetings. To the world, Robert was a titan of industry. To Eleanor, he was both father and stranger, present in title, absent in spirit. He noticed the remnants of the cake on the table, the faint aroma of melted wax, and his sharp eyes narrowed. You had company? He asked, his tone more curiosity than warmth. Eleanor hesitated, knowing her father's instincts. Yes, she said finally. A man and his son. They joined me for my birthday. Robert paused, setting down his briefcase. A man and his son? His brows furrowed. Who? They live nearby, Eleanor said carefully. The father is a mechanic. His name is Malik Johnson. His son is Jordan. They saw me here, alone, and they asked if they could join. It was kind. Her father's jaw tightened, the way it did when he heard news that didn't align with his carefully managed world. A mechanic? In this house? His voice sharpened. Eleanor, you know better. You don't invite strangers into our home. It isn't safe. And he stopped abruptly, his lips pressing together, but the unspoken words hung heavy between them. Eleanor stared at him, her heart sinking. She knew what he meant. And they were black. He didn't have to say it. She had seen it in the subtle ways he dismissed certain guests at charity galas, in the way he shifted uncomfortably when black employees addressed him directly, in the unspoken lines of separation he drew without ever admitting them aloud. "Father," she said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. "They were kind to me when you were not here. They gave me something you couldn't. Presence." Robert's face hardened. "Eleanor, you don't understand. Men like him, people from that world, they're not the company you should be keeping. You are a Whitmore. You need to protect your reputation." Something inside Eleanor snapped. For years, she had carried the weight of silence, swallowing her pain in exchange for the illusion of family pride. But last night had shown her another kind of dignity. The kind that came not from wealth or reputation, but from human connection. "Reputation," she whispered, her voice breaking but steadying as it rose. "What good is reputation when it leaves me alone on my birthday, staring at candles with no one to share them with? What good is all of this?" She gestured to the marble, the glass, the wealth surrounding them. "If I feel invisible inside it?" Robert stiffened, unused to such defiance from his daughter. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," Eleanor replied. Her hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair, her body trembling not from weakness, but from the force of her conviction. "Malik and Jordan gave me more in one evening than I've received in years under this roof. They saw me. They didn't see a Whitmore name or a broken body. They saw me. And I will not let you take that from me." Her father's face flushed with anger, but beneath it lingered something else, fear. Fear that the walls he had built to protect their name were crumbling. Fear that his daughter was finding strength outside of his control. Later that week, the inevitable happened. Word had reached Robert's circle. An offhand remark from a neighbor, whispers among staff. Questions arose about Eleanor's new friends. The polite smiles of high society carried daggers beneath them. "A mechanic's family?" One board member chuckled. "Robert, surely this is just a passing charity act." But when confronted, Robert's discomfort turned to defensiveness. He cornered Eleanor once again, his voice low and urgent. "You don't understand the scrutiny we're under. Every move is watched. Do you think they'll respect you, Eleanor, if you align yourself with them?" Eleanor looked at him steadily, her voice firm. "Respect built on exclusion is not respect at all. It's fear. And I am done living in fear of what people think." The confrontation tore through the fragile fabric of their relationship. Robert stormed out, retreating into the only world he trusted. The boardrooms and contracts where power shielded him. Eleanor, meanwhile, sat alone in her room, her heart aching not with regret, but with clarity. Days passed before Malik returned. He had not expected to hear from Eleanor again, aware of the gulf between their lives. But when she called, her voice gentle yet resolute, he understood something had shifted. "Would you and Jordan like to visit again?" she asked. Malik hesitated only briefly. He had seen enough of the world to know what lines society tried to draw, what prejudice could rise when boundaries were crossed. But he also saw the courage in her voice, and he respected it. "Of course," he said. When they arrived, Jordan bounded in with his usual joy, carrying a small drawing he had made for Eleanor. A sketch of her sitting at the cake, smiling, with Malik and himself by her side. "This was the best part of your birthday," Jordan explained shyly. "So I drew it." Eleanor held the drawing, her eyes welling with tears. It was more than a picture. It was proof. that she was no longer invisible, that her life could hold moments of beauty again, that friendship could cross the border society tried to enforce. In that moment, she knew her father's world and Malik's world would always clash. But she also knew which world gave her life, and which merely imprisoned it. The drawing Jordan had given Eleanor sat framed on her bedside table. Every morning, it greeted her. A reminder that her story was not finished, that the world still held space for joy if she dared to claim it. Malik and Jordan visited often in the weeks that followed. Sometimes they came with laughter, sometimes with silence, but always with presence. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their company with an eagerness she hadn't known since before the accident. Yet outside the walls of the penthouse, whispers grew louder. Society was quick to notice when boundaries were crossed, and even quicker to judge. Invitations to galas quietly dwindled. Board members looked at Robert with raised brows, their questions dressed as concern. "Your daughter is associating with them?" one asked over dinner, his tone dripping with false politeness. The unspoken word hung in the air like smoke, black. Robert felt the walls closing in. For years, he had guarded his empire with precision, crafting every image and association to maintain control. But his daughter was slipping beyond his reach, aligning herself with people who did not fit the portrait he wanted the world to see. He confronted her one final time, his voice heavy with frustration. "Eleanor, you're throwing away everything we've built. Do you think those people can offer you what I can? Security? Status? Respect?" Eleanor looked at him steadily, her wheelchair positioned in the center of the grand hall like a throne of defiance. "What you offer me is isolation dressed as respect. What they give me is something you never could. Dignity without condition. And I will not apologize for choosing it." Robert's face darkened. "You don't understand the cost." "No, father," she said quietly, her voice sharp as glass. "You don't understand the value." The conversation ended not with agreement, but with silence. The silence of a wall built between them. And Eleanor, for the first time, did not feel powerless because of it. News of Eleanor's companionship with Malik and Jordan eventually reached the public. The tabloids twisted it, headlines screaming, "CEO's paralyzed daughter befriends mechanic's family." The undertone was clear. This was scandal. Cameras began to lurk outside the building. Strangers whispered when Malik walked with Eleanor in public. One evening, as Malik pushed Eleanor's wheelchair through the park with Jordan skipping ahead, a passerby sneered. "What's a Whitmore doing with people like them?" The words struck like venom, echoing in the air. Eleanor's chest tightened, but before she could respond, Malik stopped, turning toward the voice with a calmness that carried more power than anger. "People like us," he repeated. His voice was steady, unshaken. "We're people who show up, who stand by each other when it matters. If that makes us unworthy in your eyes, then your eyes are blind." The man scoffed and walked away, but Eleanor's heart swelled. Malik hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. His dignity was louder than any insult could be. Later that night, Eleanor spoke softly as Malik helped her back into her chair. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you stand tall when the world tries to cut you down?" Malik paused, his gaze distant for a moment. "Because I know who I am, and I teach my son the same. They can try to define us, Eleanor, but they don't get the final word. We do." Jordan, overhearing, piped up proudly. "Dad says dignity is something no one can steal unless you give it away." Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. She realized then that she was learning from them. Not just about resilience, but about love in its truest form. Not romantic love, not love built on appearances, but love rooted in humanity. The kind that doesn't ask who you are or what you've lost, but simply chooses to stand beside you. As months passed, the unusual bond between Eleanor, Malik, and Jordan became unshakable. She began attending Jordan's art shows, her wheelchair rolling into crowded community centers where her last name meant nothing and her presence was met with genuine smiles. Malik began helping her adapt her home, showing her how independence could be reclaimed even within the limits of her chair. And Eleanor, in turn, began supporting Jordan's dreams, commissioning him to create pieces for galleries her father's wealth had access to. It was in those small, everyday acts that a new kind of family quietly formed, not bound by blood or reputation, but by choice. When Robert finally realized his daughter would not bend, he faced a choice of his own. He could cling to pride, or he could learn. For a long time, he chose pride. But on a quiet evening, he returned home to find Eleanor laughing with Jordan, Malik seated beside her, their presence filling the house with warmth his millions had never bought. For the first time, Robert's face softened. He saw not scandal, not threat, but life. He did not speak that night, but he stayed in the room longer than usual, listening to the sound of laughter he had not heard in his home for years. Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. And though reconciliation would take time, she no longer waited for it with desperation. She had built a new foundation, one that could not be shaken by her father's silence or society's judgment. Her 25th year, which had begun in loneliness, unfolded into a testament. That dignity is not given by wealth, but chosen in the face of discrimination. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the insistence on living fully despite it. And that sometimes, family is not the one you are born into, but the one you find when you least expect it. On the anniversary of that night, the birthday that changed everything, Eleanor sat again before a cake, this time with fewer candles and far more company. Malik's steady hands guided the knife once more, Jordan's laughter filled the air, and even Robert, awkward but present, lingered at the edge of the table. As the candles flickered, Eleanor closed her eyes and made a wish, not for healing, not for what was lost, but for the courage to keep choosing connection over fear, dignity over silence, love over judgment. When she opened her eyes, she realized her wish had already come true. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories.